Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Let us now focus on the outcomes of the three panels. This is an important moment where we will hear from the participants of the three panels who will provide us with a summary and the main lessons learned from the discussions. As yesterday, they will not speak on behalf of their organization or state, but as participants. I'd like to call on stage Dr. Olena Parenyuk, Coordinator of Prioritization in Mine Action Support Team of the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. Welcome. And Mr. Andriy Kondor, Head of International Cooperation at the Center for Humanitarian Demining, Secretary of the Humanitarian Demining Sectoral Working Group. Welcome. And Mr. Paul Helsop, Senior Mine Action Advisor to the Resident Coordinator and UN Country Team in Ukraine. We will start with you, Dr. Olena Parenyuk, and the panel 4 on people, restoration of agriculture and environment, tackling mine contamination impacts. Could you kindly summarize your discussion?
Thank you so much. So the panel discussion centered on the integrating mine action with agriculture and environmental recovery in Ukraine. Margot Wallström emphasized that Ukraine has a unique opportunity to revolution mine action, aligning demining with environmental sustainability. She also mentioned that Ukraine hosts more than 35% of the biodiversity of Europe, and it can provide the really valuable ecosystem services not only to Ukraine, but also to European Union. Ukraine can set new international standards for this kind of recovery. Mr. Sergei Vlasenko highlighted how landmine contamination blocks progress toward the key sustainable development goals, particularly in restoring the ecosystems, forests, and agricultural land. Ms. Marta Trofimova outlined Kernel's support for farmers through regenerative agriculture, which contributes to the ecosystem productivity and climate goals while the war goes on. She also emphasized the importance of looking at demining on a wider scale to include the mine action strategy to global climate change policy. Mr. Askild Stern-Nielsen of Norwegian People's Aid stressed the importance of the environmental safeguards in standard operating procedures and that it is possible with adapted SOPs to mitigate the future degradation of lands. So in the future, as we discussed during the panel, it is important to keep the balance between efficiency and effectiveness and create the equilibrium between short-term and longer-term strategies. And to do that, we need to rely on the science-based, data-driven tools to prioritize the efforts and the territories for demining Ukraine. Ukraine can lead by integrating ecosystem restoration into its agricultural and mine action strategies, creating a model for sustainable recovery. Alongside this, Ukraine can leverage its recovery efforts to deliver climate change services such as carbon sequestration through reforestation and improved soil health, helping to mitigate the impacts of the climate change.
Thank you very much. I now invite Mr. Andriy Kondor to briefly summarize the discussion they had on panel 5 and its key points, blending public and private partnership mechanism in mine action.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. Indeed, this panel was very interesting and very important. It was a panel with a balanced composition of different participants involving financial institutions, government actors, development institutions, and the private sector. The immense scale of challenge of mine contamination in Ukraine requires innovations not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of mechanisms of operation of the sector. In this context, the panelists agreed that it is crucial to increase the level of involvement of private sector because the traditional grant-type financing alone cannot provide the necessary pace for tackling mine contamination challenge. Therefore, harnessing the strengths of the private sector, including adaptability and strong ability to innovate, can provide additional momentum to the mine action sector. At the same time, the proper balance between the government and private sector is key. Strong national ownership remains a crucial prerequisite for the success of the mining. Not lastly, a proper role for the local government authorities has to be ensured. The panelists noted that often there is a certain gap between policymaking and the realities on the ground. Therefore, it's very important to regularly reconcile all the activities with those realities. The panelists recognize the significant importance of the launch of the compensation mechanism for farmers, which is operated by the Center for Human Mining in Ukraine. And it is important that it's not just a compensation mechanism, it's a system which involves various sectors, private sector, government actors, and it's one of the first cases when different actors were united in the effectively working mechanism, which in particular allows to significantly decrease the expected price for the mining services, which is provided by different private actors. What is also important to mention is that the launch of the market, which is already in process in Ukraine, is very important in terms of development of local capacities, the capacities of local mine action operators, and in the long term of the sector as a whole. The panelists once again noted that it's very important to ensure proper balance between the strengths of government actors and private sector actors to ensure that all the possibilities are used to speed up the mining process in the most efficient manner.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Paul Helsop, who participated in panel 6 on progress, risk management, developing standards, tools, and methods to meet current and future demands. Could you also briefly summarize the discussions you had?
Thank you. Very similar to the previous panel, identification of the scale of the problem, that there's no silver bullet, but that many advances have been made in the last 18 months. But also a need to understand risk and risk management, the definition of risk, the removal of risk, the reduction of risk, mitigating risk, and then identification of the consequences if those three things can't be done, and then either rejecting that risk or accepting it and moving forward. The fact that there's a very limited resources in Ukraine relative to the size of the problem, and to create that, we'll need a risk management-based approach. The need for good data integration, and then data-driven decision-making, and that we should be outcome-focused. So what is the minimum to get the land back into use? How can we get quick wins, quick solutions? And then I think, with relation to the topic standards, we were reminded that IMAS is very flexible. It's not prescriptive. It's there to allow risk management, or it will allow risk management, that new IMAS are being developed in the context of what's going on, and how we can use the IMAS process to support the national mine action standards, but then we need to benchmark the national standards to IMAS, ensure there's proper translation and a proper understanding of how they can be used, and that's then used for accreditation. Need for improved mapping and coordination with the regional centres that have been developed. Highlighted that 36,000 square kilometres of land have been identified as having no evidence of mines through non-technical survey, and the use of the innovative use of technology like satellite imagery, and the assessment of land. A simple one, the need to improve logistics in the country at both a national and local level, to allow the innovation that's going on to be effectively deployed, and tying in from that, working with manufacturers to ensure better sales support and better after sales. Reviewing the standards in areas like forestry, a very large amount of forestry and water is actually suspected of being contaminated. And then, how would we adapt that in the water context for rivers, for lakes, for the sea? Looking at new channels of communication for risk education, particularly highlighting the challenges of engaging with children. Use of drones, highlighted what happens when there is a catastrophe like the Kharkova Dam, and what that means to humanitarian demining, and how we need to change our thought process to address a catastrophe like that. But innovation must be driven by reality. If again, it's not the silver bullet, so there is a need for innovation, but it must be driven by the needs on the ground. And then looking at the level of support we've had for donors on innovation, and the fact that donors are very engaged on this and seem to be willing to support it. So again, making the innovation relevant to them so that they can go back to capital and justify what they're doing. Again, as I mentioned, using AI to be a force multiplier. And then I think a real key here is effective risk management requires appropriate, effective quality management. And what do we need to do in Ukraine to improve the quality management process, to ensure quality assurance, and to come back round then to risk management. and thinking about, again, is the outcome to find the mine or is to confirm the land is safe? So what is the desired outcome, not necessarily be driven by outputs? And to put that into context, if we have a risk management approach, we could perhaps bring the bill down to around $5 billion. If we don't, it could be multiples of that. And so, the RDNA process has already factored in a limited amount of risk management, which is why the number is 35 billion instead of 200 billion, but we could further do that with better risk management. And then what is all reasonable effort, and can we accept all reasonable effort? Because all reasonable effort, if it's accepted, will increase the pace of land being released and significantly reduce costs. And I would end with faster, cheaper, and safer solutions.
Thank you very much to all of you. And I also would like to ask you to tell us about specific challenges or opportunities that you have identified, lessons learned, potential next steps, on any other particular points you would like to highlight.
Okay, so let me start from myself. The lesson that we learned is that the contamination of the agricultural lands, the possible consequences of the war action on the agricultural lands are the key challenge to restore the safety of the surrounding environment and to restore the ecosystem services that could be provided. So that is why we really need to emphasize not only the demining activities itself, but also focus on the future and how we are going to use the lands. Second, that the degradation of forests that can be delivered by the landmines and delivered by the war is making the crucial impact on the ecosystem. And that is why it is important not only to regrow the forests that we have that will enhance the biodiversity, but also take realize the importance of the regrowing the forests and emphasizing the soil types that are under those forests. And the third one is there is a need for a coordinated approach among the stakeholders, including the government, international partners, and the private sector, to ensure that environmental considerations are integrated into every phase of mine action and agricultural recovery, from standard operating procedures to broader strategic framework and ending up in the climate change policy of Europe and the world.
Thank you very much. Mr. Condor?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Indeed, as was mentioned already, one of the key findings and I would say the main thought of the panel we had is that we have to consider mine action as an investment, not as a sunk cost. And it was actually to what we devoted the discussion. Indeed, it's quite difficult, it's quite challenging to combine public and private cooperation, especially in such complicated sector. However, we have to continue searching for answers. We still have much more questions than answers regarding this topic, but we need to search for answers and we need to involve private sector and financial institutions, because government-backed funding alone just cannot ensure a sustainable solution and tackling of this challenge, which is unprecedented. I mean, the mine contamination challenge in Ukraine. And that's why it's quite complicated, it's challenging, but we jointly have to continue this work in this direction. That's the main thought, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Ours is fairly simple. I think we all need to remember that IMAS is not a prescriptive tool, it's a flexible tool, and that if we benchmark IMAS to NMAS and then make the appropriate revisions, that will perhaps remove some of that confusion. We face risk in every day, in every aspect of life there is risk, so we need to think about how we can manage that risk. And then if we don't adopt a more flexible risk-based approach, we're not going to be able to have high outcome, data-driven decision-making that will lead to the results that we want. And the final thing is, by not doing that, we increase the costs exponentially, and that is going to be something that will saddle Ukraine as a nation with unnecessary debt that will take generations to pay down.
Thank you very much once again to all of you for your valuable summaries and insights of the discussions with which we approach the conclusion of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can return to your seat. Thank you.